All right, everybody, welcome to the next episode of Anthony and Ben talk about SQL Server 2025. Ben's going to show us
2025.
a fantastic demo he built today because he hates automation. He's going to do things line by line in his PowerShell script to show you how to configure something that I configured in one line of code. Ben, what are we going to do today?
I do it all in one single file, whereas you need that entire Git repo and everything. So slow your horses, my friend. Anyways, what we're going to do here today is, your demo was very impressive when you did that Docker Compose thingy where it just stood up everything needed, including SQL and Ollama and Nginx and all of that with one single line of code.
Totally impressive.
Totally impressive. I'm very proud that you were able to write a single line Docker Compose up. No, but what we also figured back then is a part of the fact that there's more than one line of code in the background, obviously, that make all that magic happen, and that's
Right.
fine. Running that thing in containers, that is fine. However, running in containers, unless you're on WSL2, you can't use GPUs in Docker. That's a big deal. And also, not everybody is actually comfortable running stuff in containers, at least when it gets to
Totally.
production. That is so perfect for testing, perfect for getting that first impression.
Yep.
But at some point, most of the SQL world is still on the Windows side of the house. So I
Yeah,
figured
1000%.
we show people how to do that. Shall we jump into the demo?
Love it. Let's go.
I think that's where we should have some animation where we actually jump into like a pool, and that's basically the demo, anyways.
You can't use
Um,
pools. That's like a weird Azure thing.
where we jump into something. We'll figure it out. I'll ask ChatGPT at some point, or I will ask my Ollama model. How about that?
Got
Anyways,
it.
let's jump into the demo. This morning, I installed a fresh Windows server, Windows Server 2022, or Windows 2022 rather than 25, just because I'm a very nostalgic person. And the only things I did so far is I installed SQL Server and I installed SSMS because I figure the fine folks watching this podcast, they probably installed a SQL Server and SSMS before. I still put the links in there and everything, and that's just going to take us too much time. Everything else here we're doing in real time. So let me actually take these bunch of lines of code here and kick them off, just so we get started. What this does is first line installs Chocolate for us. That takes about 5 seconds. So for those that do not know, Chocolate, amazing tool. It's a package manager for Windows, and it works on Windows client and server systems, which makes it very universal. Love that about it. And then basically all I say is Choco install Ollama, Choco install OpenSSL, Choco install Nginx. So it will install basically the same tools that you were installing. So we could already see in the background, it's downloading these tools, then it's doing some hash checks. Did I really download the right thing? And then it's installing it for me.
Yeah,
Just
and I
gonna
think oh, sorry, Ben. I think it's important to call out, as I was joking in the beginning that Ben hates automation, but the idea here is being able to build this system in code as he's doing right now, even though it's line by line, is an amazing thing. And I think a package manager like Chocolate provides a lot of value around that because he can just exchange this code just as easily as I could in a GitHub repository, Ben.
and I what? And I what? And I what? Especially at times like this. We're doing this now, and then in a couple of weeks or months or whenever, we're going to have CTP 2.1. I like fresh installs. If we were in containers, we would have fresh installs anyway. Let's talk a bit about how
So
containers are
fresh and so
ephemeral.
clean.
I know. I'm old school. I'm a Windows dude. So what I will do is I will just spin up a new VM. That also means I will have to reinstall all these other tools, and basically being able to just rerun that script makes my life a lot easier.
Love it.
Anyways, while that is still running in the background, it should finish in a couple of moments. Let's see what else the script is doing. First thing I'm doing, since I just installed new software, I'm refreshing my path, my system environment variable, just to make sure that all these new binaries are actually accessible for me. Because otherwise, it would be like, yeah, I don't know OpenSSL. So rather than just closing and reopening my PowerShell window,
Hmm.
that's what I'm doing. By the way,
Clever.
why am I using PowerShell ISE? Why I'm not
Because
using VS Code? This is a brand new machine. A brand new machine has ISE. It does not have VS Code. Easiest. I could have done Choco install VS Code as well and then move over there. But since we're basically only running one single demo out of this, I did not see the added value and purpose of this. I'm sorry. So I'm generating and creating a new directory, cconfig, where I'm just storing 2 config files. One is for my Nginx, and I'm generating that right out of here. Could that have also gotten out of one of these, what do you call them, GitHub repositories? Yes, I just put it all in one file for ease of deployment.
Hmm.
So I'm defining my worker connections, my Ollama upstream. Basically, what this does is it sets up that reverse proxy that we talked about the last time that will expose my Ollama through SSL because SQL Server requires SSL to work against my Ollama endpoint. It cannot work against Ollama natively because Ollama doesn't do SSL. And the
Yeah.
other thing I'm doing,
Another thing to add, Ben, is the reverse proxy also makes Ollama accessible over the network. By default, Ollama only listens on local host. Obviously there's security implications to that because it's an unauthenticated endpoint. So you could use Nginx to expose authentication as well, and other ways to protect that in
correct.
your enterprise.
Correct. So since that has also, the other thing we're doing is we're just creating a config file for OpenSSL. I'm creating a self-cern certificate because again, SSL, we need a certificate. We're self-creating that one. For my demo, I'm only using localhost, so we're good. If we were using something else, we would need to add additional IP addresses or DNS names to be included here. So just be aware of that if you're running that on your own box and you're trying to run it from the network, because obviously you cannot reach a local host from a network. So this is all done. So let's run this. We got our config. The next thing we do is I create another directory, ccerts, run OpenSSL to generate those keys and certificates. And then the other thing I'm doing in these lines here, I'm taking that certificate and use PowerShell to trust that certificate. So I'm saving that certificate to my local certificate storage, which is usually what you would do is by double clicking it, next, next, next. We don't want to do that.
No one likes to click, Ben.
No, exactly. So
Yeah.
let's
It's
do that.
also important to call out that if you're in an enterprise, you're probably going to want to work with your security team or your network operations team to get a trusted enterprise certificate in your environment. Not to say
Agreed.
that this could cause some security issues in an enterprise, but it could. So you definitely would use a different technique
Correct. I
in
mean,
your
if you
enterprise.
already have a certificate that works for your org, please use that. But still, I want to
Yes,
keep things easy for that demo.
100%.
What I'm doing now is I'm just taking that config that we just created and copy it to my Nginx directory and then restart Nginx. So Nginx will pick up that certificate, config, etc. This is it. The last thing we need to do is we have Ollama, but Ollama is based on these models that we were looking at when we were doing our create model, etc., etc. We need to pull those, kind of like a container. So what we do is Ollama pull nomic embed text. This will not work. Let's do that again. That's where there we go. That's why we never type in demos, right? That's why we pre-record everything. But now it's even broken in the recording. We're not going to fix it because we want to show people how live this is. And then we can just test this by taking this little test prompt, convert it to JSON, and send it to our endpoint. And we should end up with an embedding. There we go. This is all we need. This is everything
Numbers.
that your script did as well. You know what I got?
I feel
What
like
your Docker script.
you're throwing some shade there. It's everything that your script did as well. Nice. Nice.
You know how we talked about GPUs and Docker and all that not working?
Yeah.
Let me
Oh,
show.
here he comes.
Here it comes because I ran that script on another box. So let's jump over here. So I'm back in VS Code. Things are good. I'm connected to my SQL Server. Let me create a new database, CPU versus GPU. And I'm going to
So
create
Ben,
two. Yes.
is this the system that we just built together, or is this a different system?
It's a different system, but it
Okay.
used the exact same script.
Got it.
The only difference is that previous system is not part of my domain. So a couple of authentication, firewall issues, etc., to take care of when doing this over the network.
Got
I'm
it.
basically running two machines that use the exact same script to set up. The only difference is one of them has a very nice GPU and the other one doesn't. So I got my AI GPU in my lab and I got my AI CPU machine in my lab.
Got it. Okay.
So I'll create a little table called random text. It's going to have a text and an embeddings column. And then I'm using a REST API because why not? And it's from openlibrary.org. Basically, all it does is it provides me a couple of book titles. I'm searching for SQL Server. So if I do this, The demo gods are really not on our side today. You may have to run this a couple of times because I had issues with them earlier, but this is why we do things live. How is this? Let's give it one more try. Otherwise, I will walk you through this. There we go.
Excellent.
So it's actually not 5, but 100 rows. So we got 100 rows that basically have titles of SQL Server books, including their author, including a very famous book on SQL Server 7. So this really goes way back. So what I'm doing now is I'm updating my embeddings using my AI generate embeddings function that we have seen in a couple of previous episodes, once against my GPU, so my Ollama model, and once against my CPU model. And if I do this against my GPU, 4.3 seconds, not too bad.
Wow.
I do that against my CPU, 3.9 seconds. We were lying to people. CPUs are actually faster than GPUs. And that is correct up to a certain point. That is correct once you have very, very little data and if you have a very competitive CPU. That's kind of the two things that are pulling in here. So if you're only working with a very, very small data set of 100 rows, don't bother about GPUs. Let me show you something. I will just take that table and basically triple that text. So I'm just concatenating random text and random text and random text. Let me run that against my GPU. Remember, we had 4.3 seconds earlier, 2.9 now. That was even faster, surprising, which also shows you the GPU needs a little time to load the model into memory. Once it's in there, that helps us a lot. Let's do that against our CPU. Remember, 3.9 seconds earlier. Oh, it's already taking longer, Anthony. It's already taking longer. 7.3, that's still not too bad. Would you really invest in very expensive hardware for 7.3 seconds? Probably
I don't
not.
know, Ben.
Let me do this again. And I'm running my GPU. Ooh, it's getting faster and faster the more data it gets. That's very impressive. Almost as if that AI-enabled processor really knows what it's doing. Let me do that against my CPU. And we're at 7.3 seconds earlier. Just as a reminder, let's see what's happening now. Ooh, it's taking longer. I can already tell that. Okay, it's taking longer. It's taking longer. Maybe that GPU thingy actually has a value. 18 seconds, still not too bad, right? Let me show you one last thing. I will basically reinsert the same data to my table. So I now have 800 rows rather than 100.
Okay.
800 rows is still not a lot of data, but
Not a lot.
let's run that against my GPU. Okay, it's taking longer than 2.1 seconds now. One of those reasons is also every single row is a single REST API request. So that's the other thing. When I did that thingy up here that ran in 2.1 seconds, in those 2.1 seconds, or my 15.7 seconds down here, that was 100 versus even 800 individual REST API requests. Just for everybody out there that keeps telling me that you cannot use REST API in SQL Server because it's going to take forever for that to come back. But anyways, let's kick this off against our CPU as the very last step of this demo. Spoiler alert. We got about 2.5 minutes of talking left if we want to see this finish.
Oh boy.
And 800 rows is still not a lot of data.
Not a lot.
That is kind of my point. So my point being, first of all, it was very nice that you were able to do all that with one single line of code. I had a couple more lines of code, but mine uses GPU. And second of all, GPUs become incredibly valuable in this entire setup, even when working with very little data. Now imagine you were doing this against, I don't know, 54 million rows of data.
That's a lot of data, Ben.
That's a lot of. Do you know any database that would have that much data?
Well, actively right now on a system that I have access to, I'm generating embeddings for the Stack Overflow database, which has for the posts table 54 million rows, Ben. And so that on a world class machine is going to take about 8 days with dual GPUs. I ran some tests to see how long it would take on CPUs. 9 months. So there's a little bit of a different performance profile there.
No, well, 8 versus 9, that's not that big of a difference. I mean, sure, different unit of measure, but Who's counting?
Right. Yeah. So the idea there is, it's even with a world class machine that a certain volume of data will take a pretty good chunk of time. Ooh, that's a good pun there, chunking. And what we'll cover in a future episode is some data management techniques around that. Obviously,
Nice.
the Stack Overflow database has posts all the way back, I believe, to 2008 up until the one I have access to right now is 2024. And so we're going to do some interesting data management techniques on how to manage embeddings at scale in terms of storage. So we'll cover that in a future episode.
Nice. Looking forward to it. You know what? This is still not finished, but either way, I think it is time that we actually start playing the music. What you think?
I mean, we could wait another 30 seconds and just
Now it's only 20. You really
make the
want to?
algorithms happy by having more content, or we could just wrap it up,
Da 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 da.
Ben.
I mean, now we're at 220. I'll wait. Let's zoom in. But probably it's
There you go.
224. There we go. Now we can play the music.
Well, yes, or just to recap, look at that, 15.7 on the GPU, almost 2.5 minutes on a CPU. And so imagine that scaling, to 8,000 rows or 80,000 rows. I mean, I don't have a lot of tables, Ben, that have 800 rows in them anymore.
There's that.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. You want to wrap it up?
I think so. Thanks,
All right.
y'all. See you with the next episode. Here comes the music.